A cold start in Ottawa and a much hotter one overseas. Coordinated U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran are rippling through markets, diplomacy, and even weekend gatherings here at home. Later in the brief, the key question is the one experts keep circling. What exactly is the legal and strategic end state for this operation, and who gets to authorize it? Ottawa first, and quick. If you're heading out today, expect about -12 to 7 degrees Celsius and mainly sunny. In local hockey on the women's side, the Ottawa Charge dropped a tight one in Boston, losing 3-2 in a shootout. Ottawa got both goals from Rebecca Leslie. She's now at 10 on the season, and the margins stay razor thin. The Charge sit 1 point out of the final playoff spot with 13 games left. The clearest issue is still the same one their coach keeps pointing to: road results. Ottawa has yet to win in regulation on the road this season, and a tough road stretch is coming, including a March 8th matchup against the team directly ahead of them. And one smaller Canada note that's still worth clocking: the Acne and Rosacea Society of Canada says it has relocated its national headquarters to Muskoka and says it plans to keep delivering educational programming from there. Turning now to higher stakes. The main thread today is the widening set of questions around the U.S.-Israel strikes on Iran, what they were meant to achieve, how far they could go, and what rules, legal and political, are supposed to govern decisions like this. What's happening? Multiple reports say the United States and Israel launched coordinated strikes across Iran, including targets tied to military leadership, command and control, ballistic missile capabilities, and, in comparison to previous actions, sites connected to nuclear work. Iranian state media reported strikes in several locations, and smoke was seen rising from Tehran. Iran has threatened retaliation against what it calls U.S. and Israeli installations involved in the operation. And Iranian media reported missile strikes aimed at U.S. bases in the Gulf. That matters because it shifts the risk from a one-off strike to a campaign with sustained exchanges. Here's the key point. A number of security analysts describe this as unprecedented in scope, and potentially designed not just to degrade capabilities, but to shake the governing system itself. That's where the regime change concern comes in. Several experts say the pattern of targets, focused on senior leadership and the Revolutionary Guard's power structure, looks like more than deterrence. It looks like an attempt to disrupt Iran's chain of command and weaken the regime's ability to control the country. Why this matters now? Because if that is the implicit goal, the timeline and requirements change. Observers are warning this could continue for days or weeks, with the kind of sustained air operations that require refueling, resupply, and ongoing targeting decisions. And in conflicts like this, the hardest part is rarely the opening night. It's what happens when each side starts choosing the next rung up the ladder. Now the second layer, the legal and political authority question in Washington. Legal experts are questioning whether President Trump has constitutional authority to launch a new military action against Iran without Congress. The White House has not laid out a public legal justification, according to the reporting summarized here. And there are claims that key briefings to lawmakers did not fully account for the operation. The risk here is structural. If major military action is undertaken without clear congressional authorization, the dispute doesn't stay academic. It can shape how long the operation lasts, what oversight exists, and how much political support there is if the situation deteriorates or U.S. casualties occur. And that's not theoretical. President Trump has characterized the operation as a war and warned of potential American casualties. A quick Canada-oriented reset, because this is where the overseas story becomes immediate at home. Canadian reporting says reactions here are mixed. Some members of Canada's Iranian diaspora have welcomed the strikes as a possible turning point toward ending authoritarian rule. Others fear civilian suffering and argue change has to come from within. There were gatherings in several cities, including supporters outside the U.S. Embassy in Ottawa, and anti-war protests in places like Toronto. Police in Toronto say their increasing presence around places of worship and consular offices, watching for local spillover. And Ottawa's official position, as stated by Prime Minister Mark Carney, Canada supports preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, but Canada is not participating militarily and was not part of the buildup or planning. One more related national thread to keep in view while this unfolds. Trade and diplomacy are moving at the same time. Carney is beginning a multi-country Asia trip focused on trade, energy, and security, and conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is planning visits to the UK and Germany. Separately, Japan's ambassador to Canada is warning that continued access to the U.S. market under CUSMA is a critical condition for Japanese auto investment decisions in Canada, especially as the agreement heads toward a summer review and the U.S. president has signaled he may walk away from it. The mid-episode connection is this. When conflict risk rises in the Middle East, it tends to flow into energy pricing, shipping risk, and alliance politics, exactly the backdrop that makes trade access and investment decisions more fragile. The final piece to watch heading into the week, whether this remains a limited series of strikes or becomes an open-ended campaign with a defined political objective. Watch for 3 concrete signals. First, whether the U.S. releases a formal legal rationale and whether Congress moves toward authorization or constraint. Second, whether Iran's retaliation stays focused on regional military targets or expands, because that's often the point where escalation becomes harder to manage. And third, whether leaders start describing an end state in specific terms, what success looks like, and what would end the operation. That's the brief for Sunday, March 1st. Stay oriented, and we'll come back to what changes and what gets clarified.